wanted to do a quick update on some of the things that we're working on and some of the issues that are happening. And we also have here some staff as well in case there are particular questions that need more details that I might have to offer. And welcome, Ms. Tan. I know that you are here representing the Post, and I really appreciate that. So let's start with what transpired this week in terms of President Trump's announcement regarding the beginning of some massive immigration raids, and then, of course, his tweet to say that he was not going to do that this particular weekend, but wants to see whether Congress can come up with some kind of agreement before unleashing another order in 2 weeks. Here in Montgomery County, we began to prepare for this 2 years ago when the president was elected. I requested a county action plan, crisis response plan, in the event of these particular types of raids, and that basically entails having protocols for each department as well as agencies. And that's also when we began the conversation about legal defense fund. Luckily, we have not had to activate this, but given this latest announcement, I made sure to connect with Andrew Klein in order to remind him that we did have this in place. This is something that we worked very closely with the Ike Leggett administration. I think it's important for jurisdictions to be prepared, especially when you think of possible situations where you might have a child in summer camp that comes home and parents are gone. We need to be able to then respond to these types of really horrible possible circumstances. It is also known that Montgomery County has a longstanding policy where our police department does not cooperate with ICE, with some exceptions when it comes to violent crimes. And that is because, of course, our resources are targeted to work on public safety issues in our community, not to do federal enforcement work. And so anyway, we will continue to monitor this situation, and we have also distributed Know Your Rights information in different languages, and also have a council liaison as well as a liaison in the administration in case there are deportation rates that are reported, and sometimes they're very difficult to confirm, so we also have that as part of our protocol. I think it's really cool that our communications office has been the recipient of an Emmy Award for a Hispanic Heritage Month video that was produced last year. This was part of something that I take great pride because my office works very closely with our communications office in order to produce these videos. And last year, the theme was One Endless Voice to Enhance Our Traditions, and we focus on the Afro-Latino community. And that was recognized with an Emmy, so that's really cool, kind of a good news story. We are also continuing our conversation regarding accessory residential units, ADUs. This is something that we are looking at very carefully. Our next work session is July 9th, and that is when we will continue to basically have a dialogue regarding the CTA, and then also consider possible amendments that council members have been working on. I will say that this particular housing type is one that, in my opinion, will have a positive impact on young professionals who may be looking at alternatives to housing in Montgomery County, as well as our seniors who are looking to downsize. And so I think in that respect, it can offer an alternative. I do not believe that this is the panacea for affordable housing response. For that, we have quite a bit to do. But I think that it does provide some opportunities for for that population. I also think that as someone who has been drafted to participate as a member of the Council of Governments Housing Work Group, and we will have a retreat coming up in July. I'm a member of the Board of Directors. We are going to be exploring the fact that, the data that they have analyzed has shown that we need something like 72,000 additional units of housing on top of a number that has been identified already. And this issue of different housing types is one that everybody's going to look at. And of course, every jurisdiction has different challenges and different opportunities. So whereas in Prince George's County, they may have a lot more available land. It may be less expensive than Montgomery County that has a lot more restrictions, especially because we have 30% of our land in the agricultural reserve. We need to look at different housing types in order to keep up with this need. At the same time, looking at our transportation infrastructure, Virginia may have other, characteristics as well. So this is something we're going to be looking at very, very carefully, and obviously really welcome the participation of our residents in terms of feedback. Even though we already had a public hearing, we continue to hear from residents, and we like that because it is important to continue to take the feedback into consideration. Another area that we have been working on very diligently under my presidency, this has been a big priority, is our workforce development efforts as well as our economic development efforts. And we understand very clearly that Montgomery County is very well positioned to be a pivotal player when it comes to economic development as well as workforce development. And it is also clear to us on the council that we need to take a different approach in terms of how we have structured these efforts. And this is why I have introduced a Bill 1919, which basically expands and gives us more flexibility in terms of what kind of institutions we could assign to take up or own the workforce development activities. So at this point, it is just designated for our nonprofit organizations, and we're expanding with this bill to give us the flexibility that it could also be an institution of higher learning. We have Montgomery College that is very well poised. We have universities of Shady Grove that can play a pivotal role as well. And so we want to have that flexibility. At some point, we'll have to decide whether we want to keep everything in a nonprofit setting, or if there are different components that can go to different types of institutions or not. So this is our first step to allow ourselves that kind of flexibility. And tied with that is a conversation that we're going to have tomorrow with the executive on economic development. Once again, our Fed committee, as well as the entire council, we've had discussions about where we are with our current structure, where we need to go, what about issues around branding, issues around recruitment of companies, what about aligning all of this in every single part of our county, because we have so many assets throughout the county. And so I think that in a way it's great that we don't have to worry so much about creating synergy. We have that already out there. We just need to make sure that we have an aligned strategic plan to execute all of this. And again, this council is very ready and very willing to aggressively pursue this. So tomorrow we will hear from the executive what kinds of thoughts they are working on, what kind of approaches they're working on, and then we will also share with the executive what we have been working on over here to see if there's alignment of how we can move this very important policy area forward. One particular, I think, component of this notion that we have a lot of assets in Montgomery County is Wheaton. And so very excited that on Wednesday we're going to have the topping out ceremony for the Wheaton building, where we're going to have park and planning and then other departments as well. And this is moving forward quite well. The expected date for opening is spring of 2020. As you know, this is part of the revitalization of Wheaton. It's also going to have a plaza where it will be activated, where communities can come and celebrate, festivals, just come out and have a great time, because Wheaton doesn't have a place like that for convening. But also a component of this building is something that I've been very excited to lead on, and it is the possibility, the very real possibility of a arts and cultural center. And so already a national consulting firm has worked towards coming up with a concept. And I think it's extraordinarily exciting. This, to me, is what will really activate and give Wheaton this amazing identity of a very vibrant part of the county, given that it's already designated as an arts community by the state, but it doesn't have an actual place where all of the different expressions of art and culture can come together here in Wheaton. So that's very exciting, and we will be working towards that. In terms of the planning board appointment process, we will take a vote tomorrow. We interviewed 7 of the 24 residents who applied for the 2 positions, and those were the 7 people who were the top ranked candidates. We interviewed Casey Anderson for chair, Julian Hafner for member, William Kerwin for member, Charles Kaufman for member, Jennifer Russell for member, Partat Verma for member, and Brandy Brooks for both member and chair. And it is my hope that tomorrow we will have a vote by acclamation to appoint a member and a chair. I will also say that obviously these are very important appointments because everything that I was just describing regarding our economic development, our workforce development, this is all very connected to how we address issues of land use. And so I think that it's very critical that the members and the chair, that they are people who understand and reflect basically where we are headed in Montgomery County and can provide us with that kind of support as they come to the council with proposals and master plans. Also, I will say that tied to that is a community conversation on racial equity and social justice. We're going to have this on June 26th at Black Rock. And as you know, we are engaged in this year-long effort that will culminate with the adoption of legislation to create a racial equity and social justice law in Montgomery County. And we feel very strongly that community input is key. Just this Saturday, I was here present at the Lincoln Park community along with Councilmember Joando and other guests talking about these issues. And this is our second council community conversation. We had one in downtown Silver Spring in March that was very well attended, standing room only. And now people, of course, wanted to know when we were going to do it up county. And we said, well, this is the one for up county. At the same time, we have a toolkit so that different members of the community or groups, anybody really, can have a conversation and send us the feedback. And then we also just received the Office of Legislative Oversight published 2 reports, one on best practices so that we can take that into consideration, and the other one on a baseline report that I requested so that when we begin to implement the legislation, we have something to compare ourselves to as we provide oversight regarding this very ambitious undertaking. It's very exciting that other jurisdictions, including DC, are also working towards this end. I think it's very clear that there's consensus that unless we are able to put in particular ways of deconstructing many of those structural issues that have led to all these disparities, unless we do that, we're going to continue to spend money in ways that may not ever really truly eliminate these disparities. And so I think this is why so many jurisdictions have taken this step of putting in structural vehicles in order to address this. Lastly, I will say that in terms of public safety, we did have last Tuesday a joint government operations and fiscal policy as well as public safety committee session. And this is regarding ongoing communication outages that have been occurring in our radio system and that our first responders obviously rely on and are very concerned. The county executives team is working on this issue, and it's our understanding that it will be providing coverage maps to the council today for a 22-tower system. We do have a staff team on the council that will review the information in hopes of moving forward. I don't know at this point, what the map will include in terms of locations, but it is clear that since in the last 2 months, this aging system has malfunctioned at least 4 times, and this is absolutely unacceptable. I think that the particular joint committee session was an example of how important this is to us and to our residents. And we do look forward to the executive sending this map in order for us to facilitate moving forward with an expeditious action to avoid these types of outages. So with that, I think that's a lot of what we're working on. And we do have a number of bills that have been introduced, and obviously we'll be engaging in public hearings as well as work sessions. So it's a very busy summer. I keep joking that during budget, all the committees kept saying, hey, we'll go in depth on this issue in the summer, and we have this huge list. And of course, now everybody's realizing that we literally have about, 6 weeks left of work. So we're gonna do whatever we can to get to this. And I will only add one more piece of that. The Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee also has a very ambitious table of fiscal policy items that we're going to be revisiting. And this has to do with a lot of our fiscal indicators. We're going to be looking very closely at, for example, our debt service, our reserve target goals, and make sure issues like OPEB, issues for our retirees, et cetera. We're going to take a step back and take a look at that very carefully, because it is very difficult to do that during budget when we're working to, on a deadline to adopt a balanced budget. But we have put together, with the assistance of Gene Smith on our 6th floor central office, a very, I think, well thought out chart with all of these type of items that I think are of extreme importance for us here on the county. All right, any questions?
Is there a date set for when the council will vote on GTA 1901?
There isn't one yet. We will have our work session on July 9th, see how far we get. It's very important for us to take our time and make sure that all the questions have been answered, and if there are going to be amendments, that those are, well thought out, et cetera. So I'm not rushing it through. I just think that it is important to take our time.
The Supreme Court has an important case this week regarding the proposed citizenship question on the census. Can you just talk about some of the implications this has for Montgomery County?
Sure. Well, as you know, there are a lot of angles regarding this particular proposal. Obviously, there is the conversation of allegations that this has everything to do with, gerrymandering, basically, and looking at ways to suppress the vote of immigrant populations or people of color, and there's allegations that that is really what is behind this. But the real practical impact of this obviously has to do with resources. Number one, it's really critical, and especially for a jurisdiction like ours, where you have more than 30% of our residents as being, foreign-born. The bottom line is that we have a lot of households where you have mixed status families, and you may have a family member that is working through the immigration process. Maybe it's a permanent resident, or maybe just got their residency, and that person will have to say, no to being a citizen. So there's that implication as well. It's not as if the way it's presented gives you, the ability to clarify things like that. So it creates a lot of mistrust because we all know that this current administration has done everything to be very open about how they are willing to attack immigrant populations in the country, including having no regard whatsoever for families and young children. So that it's out there. So that's number one. And number two, again, for jurisdiction like ours, the issue about resources is a true, it's of a real impact for sure. So I'm watching that very closely because having the challenge of how do you craft a message around this and how you frame a message when we talk about complete count, and that's going to be a challenge for us here in the county. There is no doubt.
What steps are you all taking this summer to encourage participation in the census?
Well, we have already a committee, and there's a lot of conversations in different communities. The executive has indicated to me that Diane Vu, who is the person in charge of the Complete Count Census Committee, is going to be sharing some of the specific activities that will be taking place the rest of the summer and the fall. So I'm waiting for that. But again, for me personally, it is a struggle trying to find an appropriate message when I cannot in good conscience say to somebody, hey, A, don't fill it out. Obviously, that's illegal. B, if you share information, there will be repercussions. I don't know that. So we're all waiting to see what might happen. I hear that today there might be some news, so we're waiting to see what might happen to the Supreme Court. Yes.
Hi. So you spoke about immigration resources that you're hoping to be able to make available. Obviously, for our student population at Montgomery College and CPS, there's a large number of people who are immigrants and also DACA recipients. Can you talk more about what you are hoping to do in order to help protect and also give more resources to that population?
So I had mentioned that we have an action plan. Basically, what that does is that it asks every single department as well as agencies, including Montgomery College, to have protocols in place. It is unfortunate that we have to do that, but it's best to be proactive and not have to scramble at in a time of crises. So that is one piece. The second piece, as everybody knows, we do have a legal defense fund, and that is also available. Thirdly, we also have identified different toolkits that, about know your rights in different languages, because that's another very important educational component. I think that it is important for Montgomery College, for example, to distribute that very widely in case these things do occur so that students know what exactly are their rights. And then also, couple with that in terms of that information for a lot of parents, things like should you designate somebody who will be the legal guardian of your child. If you have U.S. born children and you are deported, what happens? Does that child go into the foster care system? Does that child, somebody that you have designated? I mean, these are real life conversations that I cannot even imagine how you have that conversation with your elementary school child, right? But unfortunately, you have to have them. So I think it's the same for Montgomery College. And then, of course, we have, it's been publicly, I think, sent out through social media. Our police department has shared that they do not, participate or aid in this kind of way. And that's also important for us. Public trust in terms of in our communities is so key in order to protect the public safety of all residents. Because, if you have a large segment of the population that refuses to cooperate with our police department, then that affects everybody. And so we're trying to do that as much as possible. And we will continue to do that because even though there's a reprieve, I'm not holding my breath that somehow there's going to be a magical solution to this whole immigration question that is bipartisan in Congress in 2 weeks.
But beyond that, you talk about the protection part of it, which is obviously a good thing, but what about the resources to help promote scholarships, internships, things like that? Is there a plan in place or an idea that you have as of yet, or is there? For internships and scholarships, I think that not a specific initiative like that. I was referring to just kind of like the crisis mode right now. But as you know, this council and under my leadership this year made sure that Montgomery College will receive full funding because the county executive had left it short. And so even though we were operating with limited additional resources, the bottom line is that Montgomery College was, number one in terms of our reconciliation list, and we were able to provide full funding. And that helps then the college turn around and raise private funds in order to provide scholarships or, that kind of support. So, we here are doing everything to make sure that we give the college the support that they request because we also understand that there is such a large population of immigrant students. Any other question? No. Go ahead.
The county executive had recently made comments regarding that he didn't believe in the missing middle when it came to affordable housing. And I know that that's an issue that the council is scheduled to talk about this week. Can you just tell me from your perspective where you think the county is in terms of, the missing middle and affordable housing and what you think needs to be done?
That was a very interesting comment. And of course, I didn't have an opportunity to further, ask the executive to elaborate. But I think I have shared publicly that, when I began my work in in the community at the grassroots level, this was probably like 1998 when I launched a nonprofit organization, it was clear to me that so many, for example, immigrants or low-income folks would arrive in Montgomery County and they would live in Long Branch or Langley Park. And as a matter of fact, we had a planning board applicant who spoke about growing up in Langley Park. And then, through really hard work, they would save enough money and they were able to find step-up housing or the middle type of housing up county, right? So that's the story. So you would go to Gaithersburg or Germantown and you would be able to find, either a townhouse or a larger duplex or something like that. That is no longer available in terms of, affordability and or just stock. I mean, we know that particularly like in my district, we don't have a lot of townhouses, for example. We don't have a lot of that kind of missing middle. And so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about looking at and mapping and understanding that we need to make sure that people in all price points have an opportunity. But when those units are already, saturated, they're already off the market and or have not become as affordable, there is no doubt that we have a missing middle. So again, I'm not really sure what he was referring to, but I think this is just well known. It has been documented, with data. And so it is something that we're looking at. In the Veers Mill Master Plan, we did, there were a couple of sites where we were able to zone for townhouses, for example, where now there's like a, large, for example, single family home, a very large lot. So we were able to take advantage of that, where the recreation department, headquarters, where that is also right there in the corner of Veers Mill and Randolph, there was also an opportunity to zone that for townhouses because we don't have as many. And needless to say, right next to Glenmont Metro, there is a development that is happening there. And those townhouses are starting in the 400s. So, I'm not sure what he was referring to, but this is real. Mm-hmm.
We've seen in our reporting that a lot of immigrants, especially the undocumented, are now getting afraid to access welfare services and healthcare, particularly in the past 2 weeks, but also since the change in the public charge policy. And I know from a memo that I think it was released in April, so there is a problem here in Montgomery County. I'm wondering if the council is taking any specific steps to counter that, if this is a problem that you guys imagine needs to be
So we do a lot of education, under my leadership. For example, we have a Spanish language radio program every week. And also in my office, we launch a Latino Civic Project, but we also have liaisons here on the county council for our, very diverse Asian communities or Latino community. And we've also added funds for the executive to expand their, continental African and Caribbean liaisons. And the whole idea is to be able to use all of these folks to do a lot of grassroots, outreach, engagement, and communication, because there's a lot as myth, but there's a lot as a reality, right? And so I think this has always been an issue for the immigrant community because it's not new that if you're processing your residency and you have applied for social, assistance, that will be counted against you. But now it's very clear that people don't even want to, jeopardize that process. We also always see this when it comes to child care subsidies. Even though the subsidies are for the child, many parents would not apply for child care subsidies because they were afraid of putting their name in any application, which then, works against us because these are children that should be in quality child care settings. Because when they enter kindergarten, they're already, behind. So there's a lot of implications policy-wise for jurisdictions like ours when there's such, hateful rhetoric coming from the very top. We need to scramble and try to educate, but also make sure that our residents know that they can access our care. We have a very strong network of clinics for the uninsured. And so we do everything because once again, there you have a public health component, right? We want to make sure that people access primary, health care and things like that. So there is no doubt that for jurisdictions like ours, this is a real serious challenge.
Do you see apportioning additional resources to address issues of racial equity, social justice? How is that, I guess, going on right now and in the future?
Mm-hmm. Right. So right now, this year, we are engaged in community conversations. We are engaged in doing our research and making sure that we're not here reinventing the wheel, but that we're doing this based on best practices. And we're taking the whole entire year to do this, because when you think about what has led us to this moment in time, we're talking about decades, centuries. And so I did not want to, push this and rush this through. And trust me, it's been tough, because I can literally sit down and draft the legislation myself. But I wanted to be deliberative. It seems to me, after, visiting with folks in King County and Washington State, talking to people that have done this, talking to professors, it seemed to me that this is the best approach. DC has done it differently. They introduced legislation and then they're engaging in a conversation. So right now we are doing that deliberative work. Once the legislation is adopted, I'm pretty sure that it's going to call for things like an equity unit within the administration that is going to have additional resources for staff. I would like that to also include mandatory training, staff development for county government employees. So there's definitely going to have to be resources to set all of that up, shore that up, and so that we can also have the ability to do our own oversight functions here on the council. I'm sure we'll have to take a look at our staffing in a central office to see if we have that capacity, and if we don't, then we need to make sure we create that. So the long answer to say yes, absolutely, we'll have to have resources in order to do this right.
Para las familias latinas, ¿qué deberían saber sobre lo que está haciendo el Consejo en cuanto a su situación en la que se encuentran, digamos, sin documentos y papeles en este momento? ¿De qué se deberían preocupar tal vez en este mes?
Bueno, yo diría que lo más importante es recordar de que nuestro departamento policial no colabora con la inmigración, con ICE. Entonces eso es lo primero. Y la razón es porque nosotros siempre hemos tenido esa política. Entonces, en ese sentido, tienen que saber eso. Número 2, tenemos toda una lista de información de sus derechos. Entonces, es importante tener todo eso claro. Y número 3, eso de prepararse. O sea, sí, es importante identificar a alguien que pueda tener la patria potestad de su hijo. Es importante tener un plan de acción porque no sabemos qué es lo que puede ocurrir. Pero nosotros aquí en el condado de Montgomery, bien sea el sistema escolar, bien sea el gobierno, estamos preparados y estamos listos para apoyar y proteger a nuestra comunidad. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.